Do you know where the first proper human on Earth actually came from? In fact, back in the early biosphere, bipedal creatures like us humans weren't predators at all. We were basically walking takeout. Any large predator that got hungry could just catch us for a meal. Facing such a disastrous start, how did we end up at the top of the food chain? Was it just luck, or did we have some sort of main character plot armor? The answer is neither. The truth is, on the road to becoming human, our ancestors were getting beaten down almost every step of the way. They struggled daily with hunger, being hunted, and pure terror. The reason we're here today is that we were pushed to our limits. Because our bodies were weak, we had to adapt better to the environment. We learned how to learn quickly. And we had one incredibly badass ability: working together as a team. Today, one video will show you, how did the first real human actually come to be? How did we level up through a hell mode survival quest to eventually get you to sit there comfortably scrolling on your phone? 4.2 million years ago, the first ancestor we can recognize appeared on the plains of Africa. The Australopithecus. Back then, humans were small, weak, and basically walking snacks for the entire savanna. Go to the river for a drink, and you might get chomped by a crocodile. Foraging in the grass? A saber-toothed cat might take a bite. So, faced with predators, they couldn't fight them off, couldn't outrun them, and anyone hungry could just take a nibble. Their only way to survive was, always stick together, keep watch constantly, and climb a tree the second there's danger. Trees were their last line of defense, and the group was their only lifeline. The ones most easily eaten were the children, and the infant mortality rate was terrifyingly high. But it was precisely that vulnerability of the children that planted the first seed of human nature: empathy. Initially, the social structures of Australopithecus were quite complex. It wasn't just the males calling the shots. The females would secretly choose the more reliable males to ensure their offspring would be stronger. But in an era where they could be eaten at any moment, a mother couldn't possibly forage for food while raising her child. So, the entire tribe pitched in to raise them together. Amidst this mutual care, the very first sense of unity was born. Feelings and a sense of belonging. Finally, some Australopithecus just couldn't take being prey anymore. They left the forests they knew so well, and stepped out into the perilous savanna. And that single step changed the fate of humanity forever. 2 million years ago, forests were shrinking, and the savanna was spreading. Driven to the edge, our ancestors discovered a desperate gamble for survival. Scavenging the carcasses left behind by predators. And so, they learned to use stones as tools, slicing through hides and smashing bones. From that moment on, humans could never part with tools again. This species, capable of crafting tools, is known as Homo habilis. Homo habilis would track the hunts of large predators. And once the danger had passed, they would rush in to snatch up the leftover meat. Scavenging was a life or death job. They could be killed by a returning predator at any second. That forced them to divide the work. Some would keep watch, while others grabbed the meat. As time went on, the brains of Homo habilis grew larger. This shift brought about a brand new way of thinking. More importantly, crafting tools forced humans to develop their most powerful ability: imagination. You had to visualize the stone blade in your mind first, before you could ever strike one into shape. For the first time, our brains were no longer bound by the present moment. At the same time, this change in our brains also transformed group life through gestures, sounds, and emotions. In those ancient grunts and deliberate signals, the earliest seeds of language were sown within their groups. Survival depended entirely on coordination, warning of danger, sharing food, defending territory, and calling out to their children. Different tones emerged, some signaling emergency, some signaling calm, some signaling dominance, others signaling submission. Across the earth at that time, Gomphotheres and Dinotheres roamed. These behemoths shared the same land with Homo habilis. They moved in herds, treading out paths, knocking down small trees, clearing open spaces in the vegetation. Unintentionally, they reshaped the entire savanna. For early humans, these paths were opportunities. Following their footprints could lead to new water sources, new feeding grounds, or safer territories. But life in East Africa was not shaped only by predators and megafauna. The land itself was an unpredictable enemy. From its depths came the roar of fire. Volcanic eruptions would blanket the entire region in ash. These gray blankets would erase entire landscapes, hiding away all sources of food, forcing groups to migrate into the unknown. Climate, too, had its own trials. Long droughts would turn rivers into dry beds, green grass into dust. For months on end, thirst was the most terrifying threat. Then, without warning, torrential rains would return. Water that could bring life could also become a deadly weapon. Sudden flash floods would sweep across the plains, washing away everything in their path. Yet, these hardships did not stop the progress of human intelligence. From vulnerability, resilience was born. The spark of invention ignited the desire to conquer. And so, the first traveler with the ability to leave Africa, to conquer the entire world, appeared. 1.9 million years ago, this ancestor was taller, stronger, and more resilient. His body was naturally built to walk all day under the sun, to travel endlessly across the savanna, and to endure extreme climates. He possessed sturdy bones, muscles suited for long-distance treks, and a fully upright posture. Persistence hunting became his most powerful weapon. He did not need immense bursts of speed. His strategy was simple: running after their prey under the scorching sun, until the prey collapses from exhaustion. A group of Homo erectus would throw stones from a distance to harass the target. When the animal finally drops, completely spent, they use bifacial hand axes to end its life. This was the first time humans stopped running from predators. We became the predators ourselves. Homo erectus. They were the first on Earth to tame fire. Perhaps everything started with a storm. Lightning struck a tree, and the branches caught fire. At first, the whole group stayed far away. Fire represented both light and destruction. But slowly, they dared to get closer, drawn in by the warmth, and by the protection fire offered against other predators. Maybe someone picked up a burning branch, keeping it alive throughout the night. At that moment, it became an irreversible turning point. For the first time, an animal didn't just survive the fire, but took control of it. Fire provided warmth on cold nights. It could light up the darkness, and fend off other predators. And most importantly, the new flavor of cooked meat, living in a world full of giant animals. This pressure shaped the evolution of Homo erectus, including their brains and their capabilities. Surrounded by predators like giant hyenas, they were forced to develop increasingly precise memory. Remembering where the hyenas were lurking, or where they had attacked their companions, was a matter of life and death. To coordinate attacks and defenses, Homo erectus developed more complex forms of communication: signals, gestures, and sounds. They also encountered other human species, like the late Australopithecus and Homo habilis. This wasn't just a brief encounter, but a coexistence that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. The conflict with Homo habilis was direct. Both species used tools, both scavenged for carrion, and both hunted small animals. Their similar survival strategies caused their hunting grounds to overlap, which inevitably led to confrontation. When a group of Homo habilis discovered a carcass left behind by a predator, they knew they had to act fast, carving off the meat, and cracking the bones to get as much as they could carry. But if a group of Homo erectus showed up at that moment, the tension would reach a breaking point. Homo habilis would fight back with stones and wooden clubs. But the strength of Homo erectus, along with their more advanced tools and organization, would usually prevail. Slowly, the groups of Homo habilis were pushed to the fringes, until eventually, their lineage vanished entirely. But the most remarkable trait of Homo erectus was their wandering spirit. While other species were still bound to Africa, Homo erectus bravely marched into the unknown. Starting from their origins in East Africa, they spread across North and South Africa. Although no fossils have been found in West Africa, their hand tools, such as bifacial axes, have been discovered. In this region, one of the largest asteroid impacts in human history occurred. The Bosumptwi impact, right in what is modern-day Ghana. A rock fell from the sky, releasing unimaginable energy. The earth shook and the forests burned, leaving a massive crater in the heart of the jungle. For the Homo erectus living there, this disaster must have been beyond their comprehension. The African climate during this period was unpredictable, alternating between long droughts and torrential rains. causing rivers to dry up and resources to dwindle. Huge herds of herbivores were constantly on the move, in search of fresh grass and water. Homo erectus, naturally built for long-distance travel, had no choice but to follow them. Setting out from East Africa, they crossed the Nile Corridor and the Sinai Desert, reaching the eastern Mediterranean and the Caucasus. In Eurasia, they had to wear clothing to withstand the cold. At first, they had to use whatever they could find. Animal hides stripped from creatures they hunted or scavenged from carcasses. Slowly, they learned how to clean the hides, drying them over a fire, then wrapping them around the body for better insulation. They were no longer reliant solely on natural shelters. They carried their own protection against the climate. Thanks to this innovation, Homo erectus reached places that were previously inaccessible, surviving in regions where winter would have frozen other humans to death. Across the lands of Eurasia, they encountered massive creatures, including the woolly rhinoceros. These behemoths likely inspired humanity's earliest sense of awe, fear, and reverence. These enormous animals were more than just meat. They were forces of nature. Perhaps they were the earliest spirits or gods in the human imagination. Confronting them was extremely dangerous. Their speed and power could take a life in an instant. And yet, the carcasses they left behind after being killed by other predators became an unprecedented source of food. They crafted sturdier hand axes and fire-hardened spears. These tools were like extensions of their own bodies. One of the giant carnivores they faced was the primitive cave lion, a beast larger and stronger than modern-day lions. These predators did not hunt alone. Encountering them in the open practically meant death. Starting from Eurasia, Homo erectus expanded into India, China, and even the Indonesian archipelago. It is believed that they took advantage of falling sea levels to reach places as far as the island of Java. But there is another startling possibility. Homo erectus may have been the first navigators among our ancestors. Perhaps they built simple rafts to cross the seas, driven by the desire to explore new territories. On Java and the surrounding islands, they lived alongside gigantic animals, including the giant monitor lizard, a direct ancestor of the Komodo dragon. These reptiles were terrifying predators that would hunt by stealth and ambush, weakening their prey with bacteria-filled bites. On the island of Flores, Homo erectus may have also competed with the giant marabou stork, a massive bird that lived in the open plains. This bird is not only awe-inspiring, it even competes with humans for prey and small animals. Night, once a time filled with fear and the darkness, became a warm, bright, and safe space by the fire. Watching the flames dance may have sparked human introspection, abstract thinking, and the first glimmers of perception of the future. They did not yet have a clear language, but their vocalizations were already quite complex, far richer in variety than the sounds of chimpanzees. By the fire, they used gestures, sounds, and shadows to mimic animals, or to reenact scenes from the hunt. Gathering around the flames likely became the very first public space, strengthening the bonds of the entire group. Male and female Homo erectus were similar in size, which suggests that violent competition had decreased. A male no longer relied solely on brute force to carry on his bloodline. He needed to cooperate, form alliances, and build lasting relationships with a partner. Perhaps it was here, in the grasslands and forests where they roamed, that the love of monogamy first appeared. A Homo erectus infant required years of care from adults. Having two protectors greatly increased their chances of survival. Fossils show that some individuals even lived into old age, despite suffering from illnesses or broken bones. This proves that someone was looking after them, someone bringing water and food to the elderly or to injured mothers. From this fusion of endurance, cooperation, and shared warmth, a more powerful species was about to be born. They would be the first to dare to challenge giant beasts head-on. 700,000 years ago, Heidelberg man arrived, ushering in the era of the giant hunters, among the Homo erectus groups in Africa. Their sturdy bones, sloping foreheads, and powerful jaws showed that this was a species evolved to survive in a harsh and ever-changing world. Thus, a different kind of human emerged. taller and stronger than their ancestors, Heidelberg man. Unlike all humans before them, the Heidelberg people didn't just survive among the giants. They dared to hunt them down. Their brains were capable of planning for the distant future. Their social cooperation reached an unprecedented level. A single person had no chance against a straight-tusked elephant, but an organized group could devise a strategy. The strength of their arms was amplified by the tips of their spears. Individual fear transformed into collective courage. Hunting giants required more than just muscle. It required coordination through shouting, signals, and gestures. The hunt became a calculated strategy. Surrounding, applying pressure, and waiting for the perfect moment. This need for coordination gave birth to primitive language, a series of vocalizations approaching human speech. A massive animal weighing several tons could feed an entire tribe for days. Distributing this meat required rules and leadership roles, and perhaps the earliest signs of authority within the group. As their population grew, the Heidelberg people began to cross plains that are deserts today, such as the Sahara Desert. The Sahara back then was completely different. Vast rivers flowed through the region. Huge lakes, like the ancient Lake Chad, which at its peak was larger than the Caspian Sea, covered the land. It was a mosaic of grasslands and open woodlands, home to all kinds of megafauna, such as the Civatherium, an extinct relative of the giraffe, and giant camels, larger than any camel existing today. The Heidelberg people left Africa through modern-day Egypt and Israel, and from there, they entered Europe. It was a world of dense forests, cold climates, and distinct seasons, shaped by the fluctuations of the Ice Age. But the Heidelberg people possessed the skills needed to thrive there. Once they settled in Europe, they became isolated from their African kin, due to climate and geographical barriers. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they evolved into a species adapted to the cold, a species that excelled at hunting large European game. The world was about to see the true rulers of the Ice Age. 400,000 years ago, the Neanderthals arrived. The bodies of this new species were perfectly designed for cold climates, hunting, and endurance. They were shorter, stockier, and much tougher. This physique reduced their surface area, helping them conserve body heat more effectively. Their bones were thick, and their muscles were incredibly well developed. Sloping foreheads and heavy brow ridges gave them a fierce appearance. But their brains possessed an astonishing level of complexity. This was the body of a hunter specialized for close-quarters combat with massive, dangerous animals, like mammoths. They would track herds from a distance for days on end, memorizing their movement patterns, migration routes, and weaknesses. Neanderthal tribes would target mammoths that were already vulnerable, such as an aged, frail one unable to defend itself. Using shouting, fire, and thrown spears, they would harass the herd to isolate their chosen prey. They used spears specifically designed for close-range hunting, putting the full force of their bodies into driving the spears deep into the animal. Neanderthals did more than just survive. They were also creators. Evidence shows they made pendants from eagle talons. These were likely symbols of status, protective amulets, or even part of ritual ceremonies. For years, people assumed cave art was exclusive to Homo sapiens, but discoveries in Spanish caves proved otherwise. There, researchers found hand stencils, created by placing a hand against the wall and blowing pigment over it. These predate the arrival of Homo sapiens. They also found stalactites and stalagmites painted with red pigment. There is even evidence suggesting that Neanderthals may have created music, or at the very least, rhythmic and melodic sounds. In the caves where they took shelter from European winters, researchers have discovered perforated bones. Some researchers believe that these are the remains of flutes made from cave bear femurs. Neanderthal brains were similar in size to those of Homo sapiens, perhaps even slightly larger, though the shape was different. They were natural experts, capable of memorizing vast amounts of information about terrain and animals. The hyoid bone of a Neanderthal was almost identical to that of modern humans, which suggests they had the ability to produce a wide range of sounds. They might not have spoken exactly like we do, but they had the capacity to develop a structured, nuanced, primitive language. Their voices were likely quite deep, with a low-frequency resonance, containing vowels and consonants similar to our own. Even though they were strong and well adapted to the cold, around 45,000 years ago, Neanderthals encountered a new species. And then, their decline began. Sometimes, a small tribe of Neanderthals might have spotted a group of tall, strange-looking people, Homo sapiens. Violence did occur. Neanderthal fossils show wounds caused by the weapons of Homo sapiens. Their first reaction was likely suspicion and fear. Noticing the physical differences between them, there might have been shouting between the two groups, threatening gestures and displays of weapons, until the smaller party retreated. But when hunting resources became scarce or winters grew particularly harsh, contact became inevitable. For instance, competing over a large animal carcass easily led to violent confrontation. Neanderthals had the advantage in raw strength and close-quarters combat, while Homo sapiens relied on projectile weapons to strike from a safer distance. Both species were apex predators, which meant they depended on the same resources. Therefore, war was almost inevitable. It was a large-scale conflict between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals that lasted for thousands of years. Like territorial predators such as lions, they were extremely violent toward their rivals. They would kill their competitors and their offspring to secure their territory. From an ecological perspective, it makes perfect sense. Genetic and archaeological evidence shows that the Neanderthals eventually lost their territory. Deprived of resources, they gradually faded away. They couldn't compete with Homo sapiens, who possessed more complex language, could form larger social groups, and used more advanced technology. But the Neanderthals didn't vanish entirely. Part of their lineage merged with Homo sapiens. All modern humans outside of Africa carry between 1 and 4% of Neanderthal DNA. While the groups as a whole rarely intermingled, the integration of individual members was very likely. A young, lonely Neanderthal, perhaps the sole survivor of a predator attack, might have been discovered by a group of Homo sapiens. Out of compassion, they took him in. As time went by, he became part of the modern human group. His distinct appearance and powerful build might have even earned him some admiration, especially if he happened to be an excellent hunter. Children born to Homo sapiens and Neanderthals became a bridge between two worlds. They inherited their father's strength and their mother's nimble intelligence. And just like that, as our species reached the European continent, the Neanderthals disappeared. But the origins of modern humans do not lie in Europe. They lie somewhere in Africa, beneath the relentless sun and endless savannas. 300,000 years ago, the Heidelberg group that stayed in Africa gradually evolved into Homo sapiens. Their bodies were tall and lean, naturally adapted for long-distance travel under the harsh African sun. But what truly set them apart wasn't their bones. While others might see nothing more than a footprint on the ground, they could read the entire story of the animal that left it. Its size, the path it took, and how exhausted it was. They developed symbolic language, complex thought, culture, sophisticated societies, and advanced technology. 74,000 years ago, at the dawn of a defining era for Homo sapiens, the Toba supervolcano on the island of Sumatra erupted. This catastrophe nearly wiped us out entirely. It was an explosion of unimaginable proportions. Billions of tons of volcanic ash were blasted into the sky, blocking out the sun for months on end. The Earth entered a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Temperatures plummeted, rainfall became unpredictable, and droughts grew severe. In Africa, where Homo sapiens lived, the landscape changed drastically. Fertile grasslands turned into barren, arid land. The herds of herbivores that served as their primary food source saw their numbers drop sharply. Genetic analysis shows that in certain parts of East Africa, the human population dwindled to just a few thousand. This means that all modern humans are descended from that small, incredibly resilient group of survivors. It was a brutal form of natural selection. Only those capable of adapting to hunger, the bitter cold and the deep uncertainty could successfully carry on their bloodline. This catastrophic event acted much like a natural filter, weeding out the weakest among them, amplifying the resilience and creativity of the survivors. Not long after, about 70,000 years ago, in a corner of Africa, something extraordinary happened. A seed awakened within the brains of our ancestors. Although this change was gradual, its impact was so profound that experts call it the cognitive revolution. It is believed that a genetic mutation altered the way neurons connected, giving rise to more complex language and more flexible memory. This increased the internal connectivity of the brain, granting us the ability to connect ideas, to invent symbols, and to imagine the future. Homo sapiens went beyond simple alarm calls, and began combining sounds into sentences with subjects, verbs, and objects. With this complex language, it helped coordinate hunts and establish social hierarchies. The most important thing when establishing social rules is to share stories that can unite the entire group. Knowledge began to accumulate and was passed down from one generation to the next. During the cognitive revolution, music also appeared. Perhaps it all started with a rhythm. A group of Homo sapiens gathered around a fire, tapping sticks against the ground, mimicking the sounds of their hunting footsteps. The repetitive sound awakened something. A resonance within their bodies. Shared vibration. And then came the sounds. At first, it was imitating animals on the savanna. Later, it was imitating the wind or thunder. Someone added a whistle. Suddenly, different sounds intertwined. A sense of collective creation was born. Something invisible, yet powerful. Later on, more complex instruments appeared, the flute. A child was playing with the hollow bone of a large bird, and blew into it by accident. Suddenly, air rushed through the tube, producing a sharp whistling sound. The whole tribe looked up. This wasn't the sound of the wind. Nor was it the call of an animal. This was something new, something created by their own hands. In that same era, animal paintings appeared, painted on the damp walls of caves. Perhaps they did this to teach the young how prey moved, or where to strike with a spear. Or, perhaps it came from a deeper yearning to tell the stories of what they had experienced, and pass it on to those who would come later. All of this enabled Homo sapiens to leave Africa approximately 60,000 years ago, to colonize Asia, Europe, and eventually the rest of the world. They first crossed the Nile Corridor and the Sinai Peninsula, spreading to the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. From there, they branched out in different directions. Some headed toward the Arabian Peninsula and the Near East, others toward the Eurasian steppes. In the Eurasian region, the pact between wolves and humans began. Two apex predators that did not compete with each other to the point of extinction. Instead, they formed an unlikely alliance. The boldest wolves crept toward the camps in search of leftovers. Slowly but surely, humans began to see them as alarm systems and hunting partners. Over in Asia, Homo sapiens reached India. Then, they moved along the coast toward Southeast Asia, about 50,000 years ago. This journey required them to intentionally cross the open sea, likely using very simple boats. Once there, they encountered a strange environment. Home to Stegodon, which had been isolated for thousands of years. But what surprised them most must have been another human species. The tiny Homo floresiensis. Nicknamed the Hobbits, they were only about 1 meter tall. They were likely the descendants of a group of Homo erectus that had arrived in Southeast Asia nearly 1 million years earlier. Once they settled on the island of Flores, their bodies gradually shrank over time, because in a place with limited resources, those who required less food had the best chance of survival. The time our species arrived in this region coincides chillingly with the time this small human species disappeared. Is it possible our ancestors hunted them down? For Homo sapiens, wiping them out might have meant more food and fewer competitors. However, despite their small stature, the hobbits were no pushovers. They were an intelligent species. Hunting them would have been more like fighting a group of clever and well-equipped humans. All the evidence suggests that Homo sapiens hunted the stegodon as well, and in doing so, our ability to cooperate in large groups and plan for the distant future gave us an unbeatable advantage. The Flores humans, having been isolated for hundreds of thousands of years, simply could not compete. They went extinct around 50,000 years ago. About 40,000 years ago, some groups of Homo sapiens dared to go even further. They crossed the seas to reach Australia. This journey required intentional navigation across open waters. It was an extraordinary cognitive and technological achievement. It marked the moment humans reached a brand new continent, a place inhabited by giant marsupials. Here, you'll find creatures you won't see anywhere else on Earth. Like the marsupial lion, prowling through the forests. Or the giant short-faced kangaroo, bounding across the plains. Standing 3 meters tall, weighing over 200 kilograms. Homo sapiens used fire to drive the herds, and spears to complete the hunt. Its sheer size made it an incredibly valuable prize. Enough meat to feed an entire tribe, plus useful hides and bones. Much later, during the Ice Age, other bands of Homo sapiens followed the mammoth herds, across a natural bridge made of ice and land. The Bering Strait. Starting from Siberia, they ventured into the unknown, forging a path toward a virgin continent. That is how they reached the Americas, first the north, and eventually, the farthest corners of the south. In just a few thousand years, Homo sapiens became the first creature to inhabit every single continent. As time went by, adapting to such vastly different climates and landscapes, began to shape the visible differences in the human body. In Africa, the cradle of humanity, melanin remained abundant. It was an invisible armor against the damage of the sun. African Homo sapiens retained lean, agile bodies, capable of enduring a full day of physical labor under a relentless sun. In Northern Europe, long winters and scarce sunlight sparked the opposite adaptation. Lighter skin became an advantage. It allowed the body to produce vitamin D even in dim light, which was vital for strong bones. In Asia, the vast landscape, stretching from tropical jungles to frozen steppes, gave rise to a wide variety of adaptations. In the eastern regions, eyes evolved folds to protect against the wind, the cold, and the glare of the snow. In North America, the chill of the tundra shaped compact, resilient bodies. By contrast, the diversity in South America was immense. High up in the Andes Mountains, lungs expanded to make better use of the oxygen. In the Amazon rainforest, endurance against heat and humidity defined daily life. The journey of Homo sapiens took them to every corner of the globe. But the true revolution had yet to begin. The wild world was about to become a human world. 11,600 years ago, the ice retreated. In its slow withdrawal, dying glaciers returned the land to life. A new, fertile world emerged. Humans lived in small, nomadic tribes, dependent on animal migrations and seasonal wild fruits. But in the hills of what is now southern Turkey, something impossible was taking place. One of the greatest mysteries in human history, the dawn of civilization, had been ignited. This was not a cave, but a temple carved by human hands. Göbekli Tepe. It consisted of massive stone circles, dominated by enormous T-shaped pillars. The pillars were covered in carvings of animals, perhaps guardians, perhaps spirits. Within these stone circles, nomadic tribes may have held rituals gathering hundreds of people. The people who built these stones were not farmers. They were the last of the great hunter-gatherers. According to our understanding, nomadic peoples had neither the social organization, nor the resources to build something so magnificent. We had always believed that humans first settled down, then developed agriculture, and only then built temples for their gods. Yet, Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. A more subversive idea is that temples appeared before cities. What if it was faith, along with the need to feed the builders and pilgrims, that forced humans to master agriculture? Then, after 2,000 years of use, the final mystery emerged. It was as if they wished to bury a sacred secret forever. Yet, the face of the world had changed forever. The spirit of the builders lived on through the memories of tribes and generations, eventually being rekindled thousands of years later in Mesopotamia. 6,000 years ago, on a dry and unforgiving land scorched by the sun, something was born that would change the destiny of humanity forever. This was Mesopotamia. The floods of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers could leave behind fertile black soil, but they could also destroy an entire village in an instant. For generations, people lived under the constant threat of these forces. But in the minds of Homo sapiens, a new idea began to take root. We shouldn't just endure nature. We should master it. Through collective effort, they dug canals and built irrigation networks, making abundance possible. Agriculture was no longer just a contract with the land. It was a triumph over nature. From this network of canals, cities were born. Uruk rose up, becoming the world's first true metropolis. A universe built of mud bricks and power. Around it, they built a wall. A boundary that separated citizens from outsiders. Abundance brought a new problem. Memory alone was no longer enough to keep track of all that was produced and distributed. And so, writing emerged. Numbers and accounts were pressed into clay tablets. Words that were once carried away by the wind became eternal records. Mesopotamia was also the birthplace of the first named gods. They gave meaning to an uncertain world. Mythology was born. They built temples, held rituals and offered sacrifices. Anu, the Lord of the heavens, Father of the gods, guardian of the stars and the sky. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, the master who brought the breeze to the fields for a bountiful harvest. Inanna, powerful and dangerous, the goddess of love and war. And Enki, the lord of the underground waters and wisdom, the protector of humanity. At the heart of the city stood the ziggurat, where the king acted as an intermediary between the gods and the people. Kings like Gilgamesh were remembered as heroes, the shepherds of mankind, the builders of the walls, the protagonists of epic tales. But wherever there are granaries, there is jealousy. Wherever there are walls, war soon follows. These cities, born from the same wisdom, conflict with one another, over water, land, and glory. Organized violence, war as an institution, was born. And with it came armies, kings, and gods of war. From the trees to the savannah, from Africa to the rest of the world. We no longer ask, who was the very first true human? Because it was those countless first attempts that earned us the title of human today. We are the creators and we are the destroyers. And as for the future of humanity, will it continue to leave behind miracles? Or will it leave behind only silent ruins?